She smiled while they buried her husbands. The story of Nanny Doss. She was called the giggling grandma. She loved romance novels, flower gardens, and the idea of a perfect love story. She also poisoned 11 people, including 4 of her own husbands, and smiled through every single interrogation. This is the story of Nanny Doss, and trust me, you've never heard anything quite like this. Welcome back to Dark Side Reports. Today we're going inside one of the most bizarre, chilling, and oddly fascinating cases in American criminal history. Because most serial killers, when you picture them, you picture someone cold, someone dark, someone who looks the part. Nanny Doss looked like your grandmother. She wore floral dresses, she laughed easily, she baked, she quoted poetry from romance magazines, and for over 2 decades, nobody suspected a thing. Not her neighbors, not her family, not even the doctors who signed the death certificates. By the time law enforcement finally connected the dots, 11 people were dead. And Nanny? She sat across from detectives, giggled, and said, "Well, I was just looking for the perfect husband. Stay with me, because this story gets darker with every chapter." Nancy Hazel, later known as Nanny, was born on November 4th, 1905, in Blue Mountain, Alabama, and from the very beginning, her life was not easy. Her father, James Hazel, was a strict and controlling man. He ran the household like a dictatorship. The children worked on the farm. Fun was limited. Freedom was almost non-existent. Nanny later described her childhood as cold and joyless. But there was one thing that gave her an escape: romance magazines, true love stories, tales of perfect men, perfect relationships, perfect happily ever afters. She became obsessed with them. While other girls her age were playing outside, Nanny had her nose buried in these magazines, building a fantasy world about what love should feel like. Here's where it gets important, because that fantasy, that idea of a perfect fairy tale romance, it never left her. And when real life couldn't match that fantasy, Nanny didn't adjust her expectations. She eliminated the problem. At age 16, Nanny married her first husband, Charlie Braggs, in 1921. It was a fast marriage, partly to escape her father's control. They had 4 children together, but Charlie wasn't the man from the romance novels. He drank. He was difficult. The marriage was miserable, and then 2 of their children died. Sudden, unexpected, no clear explanation. Charlie, to his credit, or perhaps to his luck, became suspicious enough that he eventually left Nanny, taking their eldest daughter with him. He later said he left because he feared for his life. He was right to be afraid. Here's what I need you to understand going forward. Every single man who stayed with Nanny Doss ended up dead. Everyone. And the method was always the same. Always quiet. Always invisible. Keep watching, because the next chapter is where the pattern truly begins. After Charlie left, Nanny didn't slow down. She went right back to her romance magazines and right back to searching for that perfect man. In 1929, she married husband number 2, Frank Harrelson. Frank had charm at first, but Frank also had a drinking problem, a serious one, and according to Nanny's own accounts, he was abusive. For 16 years, Nanny stayed in that marriage, and then in 1945, Frank Harrelson died. The cause? Stomach problems. At least, that's what the death certificate said. Years later, when investigators exhumed his body, they found enough arsenic to kill a horse. But in 1945, nobody looked twice. A man with a hard lifestyle dying young wasn't exactly front page news in rural America. So Nanny moved on. Husband number 3 was Arlie Lanning. They married in 1947. Arlie died in 1952. Heart failure, the doctor said. His mother died shortly after while staying in Nanny's care. The house Arlie left behind? It burned down not long after his death, while Nanny was conveniently away visiting family. She collected the insurance money. Are you starting to see the pattern? Because here's what's chilling. Nanny wasn't hiding. She wasn't fleeing town after each death. She was right there, crying at the funerals, accepting condolences, talking about how heartbroken she was. And then, almost immediately she'd be back in the romance columns looking for husband number 4. Richard Morton came next, married in 1952. He lasted 2 years, dead by 1954. Same symptoms, same quiet exit. And within months, Nanny had already found husband number 5, Samuel Doss, the man whose name she would carry forever because he would be her last. Samuel was different from the others. He was responsible, stable, religious. He was also, according to Nanny, boring. He didn't like her romance magazines. He controlled the finances. He limited her freedom. So in 1954, Samuel Doss got sick. He was hospitalized, actually recovered, which was unusual, and came home. The night he came home, Nanny made him a special meal to celebrate. He was dead by morning. His doctor, suspicious for the first time, refused to sign the death certificate. He ordered an autopsy, and that autopsy changed everything. The autopsy came back with enough arsenic in Samuel Doss's system to kill multiple people. And for the first time, law enforcement started asking questions, not just about Samuel, about all of them. What they found next will genuinely shock you. Stay with me. When investigators began pulling the thread, it unraveled fast. Detectives started looking back, not just at Samuel Doss, but at the trail Nanny had left across multiple states over 3 decades. Bodies were exhumed, and almost every single one came back positive for arsenic poisoning. Husband after husband. But it didn't stop there. Remember those 2 children who died during Nanny's first marriage? Arsenic. Her sister died while living with Nanny. Arsenic. Her own mother came to visit in 1953. She died shortly after. Arsenic. 11. Confirmed victims spanning more than 20 years, and through all of it, Nanny had lived quietly, smiled warmly, and told neighbors she was just an unlucky woman who kept losing the people she loved. Now, here's the psychological piece that makes this case so disturbing. Nanny Doss was not what criminologists call a thrill killer. She didn't enjoy violence. There's no evidence she took pleasure in watching people suffer. What she wanted, genuinely, deeply wanted, was control. Her entire childhood had been controlled by her father. Her marriages were disappointing. Real life kept failing to match the romance novel fantasy she'd built in her head. Poison was quiet. Poison was invisible. Poison gave her an exit from every situation that didn't meet her expectations. And arsenic in the 1940s and 50s? It was shockingly easy to obtain. Sold openly, in rat poison, in pesticides, in household products. Nanny simply used what was available. The most disturbing part of the investigation wasn't the number of victims. It was how long it took. 11 people, multiple states, multiple doctors, multiple death certificates, and not once, for over 20 years, did anyone connect the dots. Because Nanny Doss didn't look like a killer. She looked like a grandmother. But here's where this story takes its most unforgettable turn. When detectives finally sat Nanny Doss down for questioning, her reaction was something none of them had ever seen before. And I mean that literally. When Tulsa detectives brought Nanny Doss in for questioning in November 1954, they expected denial. They expected tears. They expected someone to lawyer up immediately. What they got was completely different. Nanny was cooperative, almost cheerful. She sat down, folded her hands, and began talking. For hours, she answered questions, she told stories, she laughed at certain points. That signature giggle that would later give her the nickname Giggling Grandma in the press, and slowly, almost casually, she began confirming what investigators suspected. Yes, she had poisoned Samuel. Why? Because he was boring. Because he threw away her romance magazines. Because he wasn't the man she had imagined. Detectives pushed further. What about the others? Nanny kept talking. She confirmed husband after husband. She talked about her sister, about her mother, about the children. There was no dramatic breakdown, no moment of guilt. She spoke about it the way someone might describe returning a disappointing purchase. One detective later recalled that interviewing Nanny Doss was one of the most unsettling experiences of his career. Not because she was threatening, but because she was so completely, utterly calm. She genuinely did not seem to understand, or perhaps did not care about the weight of what she was saying. When asked directly if she felt any remorse, Nanny reportedly smiled and said she was sorry things hadn't worked out differently. That was it. Sorry things hadn't worked out differently. 11 people dead. And that was the depth of her remorse. The press went into a frenzy. The giggling grandma became a national story overnight. People were horrified, not just by the crimes, but by the absolute disconnect between who Nanny appeared to be and what she had done. Here was this sweet-looking, soft-spoken older woman, and she had quietly, methodically killed 11 people across 3 decades without a single moment of apparent guilt. Nanny Doss was charged with the murder of Samuel Doss, her 5th husband, in 1955. Prosecutors focused on Samuel's case because the evidence was freshest and most conclusive. Nanny pleaded guilty. She was sentenced to life in prison. Oklahoma did not seek the death penalty, partly because of her age and partly because of the era's reluctance to execute women. She never stood trial for the other 10 deaths, though she had confessed to investigators regarding several of them. In prison, Nanny remained much the same as she had always been: pleasant, cooperative, occasionally cheerful. She continued reading romance novels. She died in prison on June 2nd, 1965, of leukemia, at the age of 59. And here's what her case left behind. Beyond the headlines and the true crime fascination, Nanny Doss changed how medical examiners and law enforcement approached unexplained deaths within families. Her case became a textbook example of why patterns matter, why clusters of death around a single individual should trigger scrutiny, regardless of how normal that individual appears. She is also one of the most studied female serial killers in American criminology, precisely because she defied every assumption people had about what a killer looks like. Because the most dangerous assumption you can make is that evil always announces itself. Sometimes it wears a floral dress, sometimes it giggles, and sometimes it's already made you a cup of coffee before you realize something is wrong. Nanny Doss wasn't a monster in the way movies portray monsters. She was something arguably more disturbing. An ordinary looking person who had decided, somewhere along the way, that other people's lives were simply inconvenient obstacles to her happiness. 11 lives, decades of silence, and a smile that never wavered. If this case made you think, drop a comment below. Tell me which part hit you the hardest. And if you want more cases like this, the ones that don't make the front page but absolutely should, subscribe to Darkside Reports, because the darkest stories aren't always the loudest ones. I'll see you in the next one.